Think about the last time a mobile game genuinely surprised you. Not tricked you, not pulled you in through a spinning wheel or a timer counting down to nothing. Actually surprised you. Made you put your phone down for a second and think, how did someone make this? Most people, when they really sit with that question, have to go back further than they expect. Here is the strange part. Mobile gaming made more money last year than Hollywood does at the box office. 3 billion people play on their phones. The device in your pocket is more powerful than the computers that once guided rockets to the moon. And somewhere inside all of that money and all of that power and all of those people, the games quietly stopped being good. After going through a decade of numbers, studio decisions, and the slow trail of where all that money actually went, one thing becomes very hard to ignore. The richer this industry got, the less interesting it became. This is the story of how that happened, and why the thing that killed it was never something that came from outside. To understand what was lost, you have to understand what was actually there in the first place, and what was there was genuinely strange, in the best way. The year is 2009. The App Store has been open for barely a year. The phones people are carrying are slow, the screens are small, and the connection drops if you walk into the wrong room. None of that matters, because a small team in Finland just put a game on the App Store where you pull a slingshot back and fling birds at pigs. That is the whole game. Birds, pigs, slingshot. And within a few years, 2 billion people had downloaded it. Here's something strange about that moment. One of the very first people to build a game for the phone had never actually held one. He wrote the whole thing on his computer, testing it on a fake version of the screen, shipping something for a device he had only seen in pictures. That is the spirit of everything that followed. People making things for a toy they barely understood yet, and accidentally making something the whole world wanted. The touchscreen was so new that just touching something and watching it respond felt like a small miracle. The phone had a sensor inside that could feel itself tilting in your hands. What do you even do with that? Some developers built a marble maze where you physically tipped the phone to roll the ball. That was a revelation. Not because it was complicated, because nobody had thought of it yet. What came out of that confusion was something close to accidental genius. Monument Valley made you twist impossible staircases to guide a silent figure through a world that broke its own rules. Super Brothers Sword and Sorcery wrapped a tiny adventure inside music that changed depending on what the moon was doing in real life. Ridiculous Fishing let you drop a line into the ocean, dodge every fish on the way down, then catch them all on the way up and shoot them out of the sky with a shotgun. These were not games ported from somewhere else. They were games that could only exist on this one strange object in your pocket, and the people making them knew it. The money in those days was almost an afterthought. A solo developer named Steve Demeter built a puzzle game called Triz in your spare time, simple colored triangles, nothing fancy, and made hundreds of thousands of dollars in 2 months. He had not planned for that. The store was so new and so empty that a good idea sitting in it had almost no competition. You paid once and the game was yours. Modest, quiet, and somehow enough. What nobody saw coming was that this very simplicity, small teams, strange ideas, honest prices, was not a feature of the era. It was a symptom of how young everything was. And youth in any industry only lasts so long before someone figures out how much money is actually sitting there. Here is something that sounds harmless until you think about it. Before 2012, a developer shipped a game and asked one question: did people buy it? One number. Clean, simple, honest. The game was either worth $1 or it wasn't. Then, Temple Run switched from paid to free. Revenue went up 10 times in the same week, and suddenly every studio in the world was staring at a completely different set of questions. Not, is the game good, but how long do people stay, at what point do they leave, and what would make them open their wallet before they do. The dashboard went from one number to 20. And every single number on that dashboard started quietly pulling the game away from what made it fun. This is the thing that gets lost in how people talk about free-to-play. The model did not make games worse on purpose. It just changed what studios were measuring. And when you change what you measure, you eventually change what you build. A level that is genuinely satisfying to finish stops being valuable if it means the player has no reason to come back tomorrow. A difficulty curve that feels fair is a problem if it lets everyone through without ever reaching the point where they might spend. The game has to be fun enough to stay and just hard enough to make leaving feel like a loss. Finding that line became the whole job. King went from $62 million in revenue in 2011 to $1.88 billion in 2013. 2 years. That number moved through every boardroom in the industry like a shockwave. And the lesson most people took from it was the wrong one. They looked at Candy Crush and saw a great game that happened to make money. What they should have seen was a system, a set of friction points, timers, and social nudges built so carefully that 70% of players who finished every level never paid a single cent, and the ones who did pay carried the whole thing on their backs. The studios that understood the system got very big very fast. The ones that kept trying to make great games and figure out the money later mostly disappeared. By 2013, mobile gaming had split into giant winners earning hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars per day, and everyone else making very little. The middle ground, where a small team could make something strange and beautiful and find an audience for it, was shrinking. Not because anyone decided to close it, because the economics of the new model made it almost impossible to survive there. What nobody saw clearly enough at the time was what this did to the actual people making the games. A developer who got into mobile because the phone was a weird new toy and anything was possible now had a product manager sitting next to them with a spreadsheet. Every design decision ran through the numbers before it could exist. The game was still being built, but the people building it were no longer fully in charge of what it became. Here is a question worth sitting with. When was the last time a brand new mobile game, something nobody had ever heard of, from a studio nobody knew, took over the world? Not a sequel, not a spin-off of something already huge, something completely new. Most people can't name one, and that silence is not an accident. Something changed around 2016 and 2017 that most people never felt directly, but quietly rewired everything about how this industry works. Getting a new game in front of people became expensive in a way it had never been before. The App Store was no longer a discovery machine with a few hundred games sitting in it. It had millions. And the only reliable way to rise above all of that noise was to spend money on advertising, a lot of it. The studios that had money spent it. The ones that didn't disappeared. And the ones that had the most money spent the most, which meant they got the most downloads, which meant they made the most money, which meant they could spend even more. The wheel turned, and every full rotation left a little less room for anyone new. By 2023, the biggest mobile game genres were match games, party games, and action games, and the titles leading each category had been sitting at the top for years. Not months, years. Clash of Clans came out in 2012 and is still among the highest earners on the App Store today. The charts stopped moving not because those games are the most creative things anyone could imagine, but because the cost of displacing them was coming to be almost impossible for anyone without a $100 million advertising budget to afford. What this did to the actual games is the part that never makes the headlines. A studio sitting on a genuinely new idea now had to ask a question that nobody in 2009 ever had to. Can we afford to tell people this exists? And the answer for most of them was no. So the ideas that got made were the ones that fit inside a system already proven to work. Another match game, another base builder, another card battler dressed in slightly different clothes. Not because the people making them lacked imagination, because imagination without distribution is just a file sitting on someone's computer. Downloads have been falling every year since 2021, even as revenue has stayed flat, which tells you exactly what happened. The same people are spending more money in the same small group of games, while fewer and fewer new players are finding anything worth downloading in the first place. The top of the market calcified, the middle hollowed out, and the bottom, where all the strange and original things used to come from, got very quiet. The phone in your pocket is more capable today than it has ever been. The screens are sharper, the processors faster, the connection faster still. Everything that makes a great game possible has improved. The only thing that got harder was the part that always mattered most, making something worth playing and finding the people who would love it. Here is the number that says everything. Last year, fewer new games were released on the App Store than any year since 2012. Not because the tools got harder, not because phones got worse, because somewhere in a lot of small studios, someone did the math, looked at what it would take to get noticed, and quietly closed the laptop. That's what the end of something looks like from the inside. Not a crash, not a scandal, just a lot of people doing the calculation and deciding the answer is no.